Have you ever felt like your brain just works a little differently, especially when it comes to getting things done? Well, in this episode, we're pulling back the curtain on executive function and its impact, particularly for those with dyslexia. You'll discover why understanding your working memory is a game changer, learn about practical strategies like externalizing your thoughts with whiteboards and mind maps, and exploring how leveraging AI can become your ultimate processing partner. So, welcome to Dyslexia Explored. I'm Darius Namdaran, your host, and today we're diving into the important topic of executive functioning and dyslexia. If you've never heard of this, you really need to know about this. And if you have, this is going to be really informative. Now, speaking of tools that support executive function, this episode is sponsored by ivvi Notes, a software that helps people create instant visual notes from lectures and meetings. It records what's said, transcribes it, and builds a mind map in real time so you can literally see what matters. It's great for executive functions and it's great for dyslexia, approved by the DSA in the UK, and you can try it out at ivvi.app, ivvi.app. So today I'm joined by someone I've known for years, Dr. Erica Warren. She's an expert in this field, and we actually co-host another podcast together called the Executive Function Brain Trainer Podcast. So Erica, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Hi, Darius. It's always great to see you and great to be here. We are both members of the Dyslexia Club. So this is something that's, close to my heart, and I love working with the population. We seem to have like this energy, kindred spirit thing going on. Whenever I meet someone that's dyslexic, it's always like, oh, welcome to the club. And it's like you have this like almost innate understanding of each other. It's really fun. So it's great to be here.
I've been meaning to have you on the podcast for years. And have I had you on before? I can't remember.
Once before, I was talking about growing up with dyslexia, but a long time ago.
That must have been early stages. Like this podcast's been going, I think 6 years now, maybe 7 years now. So that must have been about 6 years ago when we first met, round about that.
Yeah, I think it
Yeah.
was.
So let's talk about executive function. A lot of people don't know what executive function is. They've got dyslexia, they know what dyslexia is. They might have heard executive function maybe mentioned by a teacher at some point, or some educational professional mention executive function briefly, and it just sounds like another buzzword, but it's actually one of the most important phrases you can know if you've got dyslexia. I'd say number one is what is processing. If you understand that, you can really get to the heart of dyslexia. And then I would say second on that list is executive function.
And I would even say that you could even argue that processing is under the umbrella of
You
executive
could?
functioning.
Absolutely.
It's a very, very important topic. I think it's vital for the development. I think it's also such a great remedial approach for dyslexics because it teaches them how to use their brain. I think, we have a very passive way of teaching students how to use their own cognition. And the more we make that explicit, like dyslexics need explicit instruction on reading. They also need explicit instruction on executive functions, but I think just about everybody does. But the
Okay.
more we understand about our brain, the more we understand what it is, just like how could we read if we didn't know what a letter or a word was? How can we manage our minds if we don't know what executive functioning is? And it's
Yeah.
not something that's talked about in the schools. What you hear is the schools complaining about, oh, my kids don't know how to focus. Oh, my kids don't know how to listen. Oh, my kids don't know how to think. Oh, they're passive learners. These are all really common things that I hear, and they're all executive functions because we're not explicitly teaching executive functions. We're not giving them the vocabulary or anything.
Okay. So let's define what executive function is. Baseline, how would you define executive function?
The simple definition is flipping the two words and saying executive functioning is learning to be a functioning executive of your own brain, of your own emotions, of your attention, of your memory, of your flexibility, of your reasoning. If you break it down into the core components, it's working memory, which again, let's flip it, is your memory working? It's made up of three tools. your inner voice, your inner visuals, and your ability to spatialize or imagine yourself moving through space. And then we also have inhibitory control, which is a combination of attention, emotional regulation, and metacognition. And then we have cognitive flexibility, which is your ability to change in different environments, to get started on new assignments, to see different perspectives. And all of those three arenas work together to create higher level executive functioning, which is planning, time management, organization, and reasoning. So it's a lot. It's a lot,
Yeah,
but it's vital.
it is. And basically, executive function helps you get stuff done. And it also helps you achieve your goals, instead of passively flowing through life, following what someone else is doing, following what the teacher's telling you to do, or your boss is telling you to do. Executive function is taking control of the direction of something, becoming the executive of something and directing it. But you need a particular skill set and also mindset. These three parts of the brain, they're actually localized in particular parts of your brain as well. You need those to be a good executive of your life. Why is this so? We're in the Dyslexia Explored podcast. So I know the answer to this, but I'd like to hear your answer. Why do you think executive function is so useful for dyslexia?
Because it enables kids, let's use the metaphor of backseat driving or being in the backseat. I think in most schools, kids are seen as these passive receivers of information. And for a lot of dyslexics, that doesn't really work. They really need to be in the front seat. They need to be driving their own cognition. They need to be aware. Many of them do have attentional issues. And if they're aware of their attentional issues, then they can manage it. If you're aware of anything, you can move through it. It's when you're not aware of things that they take over and they really cripple you. A lot of dyslexics also have to consciously create new neural pathways, new ways of learning, new ways of navigating. And by learning executive functioning skills, you can, let's actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it down into the different types of dyslexia because there is auditory phonological dyslexia. And those kids need kind of the classic Orton Gillingham reading approach. And those kids need to be aware of what works and what doesn't work. And within that, there is a lot of executive functioning. Just the structure itself creates categorization, creates and a lot of really good OG programs integrate music and memory strategies. That's executive functioning. We want some kind of structure and organization to it. The more we organize and structure things for many learners, that helps to improve cognition. And then we have those that have a different type of dyslexia, which is a visual processing dyslexia. And those, they need to strengthen those core cognitive skills because they might be flipping words around or flipping letters around or have trouble with spatial orientation. And being able to strengthen those skills, a lot of kids, when they have a difficulty, they avoid it. Well, then we're not really giving them the practice to be able to overcome some of those difficulties. So, what does that have to do with executive functioning? Well, it's really teaching them what are their processing strengths and what are their processing weaknesses, and giving them the knowledge and the ownership so that they can also advocate for themselves and they can develop those needed skills. And then we have another type of dyslexia, which is rapid automatic naming dyslexia. And kids that have rapid automatic naming dyslexia have what you call dysnomia. They have a difficult time recalling the names of things. They'll say like, oh, the doohickey over in the thingamajigger. The other day when we were doing that thing, my mother and I spoke that language and we totally knew what we were talking about. But it's a very frustrating aspect of dyslexia. Not everybody has it, but some people do, where you know the word, you just can't access it in the moment. And of course, if there's any anxiety that's related or that's brought up in an incident where you're taking a test it tends to make the dysnomia even worse, so that a lot of the kids will know the answers to the questions, but they can't access them in the moment because they're a little bit anxious. A little bit of cortisol is motivating, too much is disabling, but it also exacerbates the ability to access information. So, developing those skills so that they can, again, whether it's memory strategies or a lot of exposure. I'm much more of a fan of, I'm not a fan of rote memorization. I'm a fan of really making connections and making things memorable. And for dyslexics, that can be such a game changer. It's really teaching things in a way where it's when they're encoding it, it's organized, because a lot of dyslexics, they throw things into memory, into their memory bank, and it's like a big messy room. And maybe you can access it, maybe you can, maybe you can find it, maybe you can't. But the more organized we encode the information, and I'll give you an example, and this is kind of an executive functioning tool, is if you had a grocery list, you could randomly remember all of the things on your list. Now, but if you were to categorize them and say, okay, we're going to get two meats, we're going to get steak, and we're going to get chicken, and we're going to get three vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, and cabbage. And then we're going to get, and if you organize it in that way, it's much, much easier to access the information, because what you're doing is you're chunking. And when
Yeah.
you're chunking, then your working memory isn't as overloaded and you don't lose a lot of information. But that's an executive functioning strategy to organize materials before you encode. You were going to
So
say something.
you mentioned working memory there. And I think I remember when you kind of introduced me to executive functions, must be 7 years ago, 6, 7 years ago. And up until that point, I was probably at a similar stage where many of the listeners are right now, where it's like, yeah, that's quite an interesting thing that people are talking about. And yeah, I must look into that sometime, but I don't really have the time just now. And when I met you, I realized how you understanding executive functions is. And I think the main reason I would recommend people really spend time understanding executive functions with dyslexia, children with dyslexia, or if you've got dyslexia yourself, understanding your own executive functions, is that it's a great place to make great gains, big wins, very simply and very straightforwardly,
Yeah.
because often there are little things that are tripping you up without you realizing. And if you just aware of those tripwires, you can take them away and deal with them, and you get a massive reward. Now, the biggest area I think of that overlap between executive function and dyslexia is this area of working memory. And that's something that people within the world of dyslexia often hear, like even some definitions of dyslexia refer to working memory, etc. And I think it's useful. Should we just start on working memory, Erica, and just kind of explore this concept of working memory because it is so useful to kind of understand working memory and how it fits within executive functions.
Working memory is vital.
Let
Yeah.
me put it into a context, like just to remind people, if we think of executive function as having three clear parts, they're not exactly clear. They're all interrelated, but three understandable parts. So the first part is how we capture information. The second part is how we focus in on it. And the third part is how do we adapt? So capture, focus, and adapt. And these are the three main modes we need to do to be in to get stuff done. So the capture is called working memory. The focus is called inhibitory control. And the adapt is the cognitive flexibility. I've just made up those three names, capture, focus, and adapt. They're my kind of just simplification of them, nothing formal about it. The formal titles are the underneath ones. So working memory is like the first phase of executive function, capturing information. Then we go on to focus, and then we go on to adapt to the environment round about us. So if we don't get information coming in and capturing it, we're in trouble because the door is shut And the rest of the executive functions just don't work very well because you're not being fed the information you need. So, could you go deeper on working memory? Let's talk about working memory.
Yeah, I'm going to go really deep on working memory, but first I just want to mention the one last type of dyslexia so
Oh,
people
yeah, sure.
don't miss that one, which is visual surface dyslexia. And if you're interested in assessing to find out what type of dyslexia you have, I do have an assessment that we'll put in the show notes, but didn't want to miss that one. So just that you know that. And then I also look at attentional dyslexia. You have to have one of the other types of dyslexia to have attentional dyslexia, because you could just have ADHD in general. But just so that everyone knows what the different types are, because it's nice to know. I hate to leave one out. But yeah, let's dive into working memory. So, working memory is a very common deficit for individuals with dyslexia. It has to do with really how much cognitive space you have, how many essentially thoughts you can juggle at once. Some people can only hold 3 items in their working memory. Some can hold up to, I think, as many as 7, but it's unusual. Now, you can hold more information in working memory if you're chunking. So we chunk phone numbers. Remembering each number is difficult, but when you chunk it into a phone number, 693-0350, now we've got it into 2 chunks. So that's kind of a way for us to expand our working memory. And now we have tools like AI that has an unlimited working memory. So we can kind of use that to support our working memories. But most kids do have a limited working memory, and they need to learn how to use the tools within working memory in order to expand it and in order to be able to use it properly. So, for example, when kids are learning new stuff, a lot of what's taught is rote memorization, and that doesn't really teach you how to use your working memory. If you want to learn how to use your working memory, then you want to learn how to use your inner voice. How can you use your inner voice to help you to learn? I'm actually just working on a workbook right now for elementary kids on exactly that. And it's really fun. I'm really enjoying it. So I have workbooks for all 3 of those, the inhibitory control, cognitive flexibility, and working memory. But that's a really fun one that I'm really enjoying. I'm really diving in deep to it right now and getting kids to really understand. It's funny, there are these certain things that we never talk about. We don't talk about our inner voice. It's like at a very young age, I always said, keep your thoughts to yourself. Be polite, don't blurt out things. But our inner voice does. It blurts out things all the time. And we
Yeah.
can learn how to manage that inner voice and direct it. We can also, because a lot of kids are walking around with negative inner voices because they're just not aware that they do have the power to accept or redirect, or they don't just have to be these passive individuals that's receiving all of these. And when I say these inner voices, we have more than one inner voice. Some of us have negative inner voices. Some of us have positive inner voices. Some have supportive inner voices. And I'm sure you could list a half dozen, if not a dozen, of different types of inner voices. Sometimes it's not even your voice. It could be your mother's voice, where you can kind of hear what your mother would say in a certain situation that
Yeah.
would guide your behavior. But you can use it as a way to guide your behavior, but you can also use it to remember things. Your inner voice can repeat
Yeah.
back someone's name, and that helps you to learn it.
Yes. I mean, this is just such a great thing to know about this working memory side of things. And the research done on working memories are really helpful, understanding this phonological loop and this visual spatial loop. Who was it? Who's the researcher that
Alan
categorized it in
Baddeley.
badly?
Alan
And
Baddeley, yeah.
he divided it into those two. There's different models for, dividing up your working memory, but having those two channels, it's kind of like having two eyes, or the ear and the eye of the mind, as it were. You've got the voice repeating certain sounds, and then you've got your mental eye visualizing and spatializing things simultaneously.
Yeah, I think spatialization is usually over in the area of visualization. It's
Yeah,
funny, I like to make it more like a trio. I really like
You
to
like, yeah,
separate
I
them.
noticed that you separated them into three.
I do,
Badly
I
put them into
do.
two. Yeah,
And in my workbook, I do that too because
right.
we do a little bit of inner voice work, but not nearly enough in school. We do a tiny bit of visualization sometimes in school, but we don't do a lot of spatialization. I was really
Yes,
excited to discover that that's actually a word, spatialization.
yes,
And it's really our ability to imagine ourselves moving through space. It's not necessarily visual. A lot of people think about it visually, and that's a good way to present it visually. It's like a mind map, and then people can kind of think of like a treasure map, and okay, I can visualize that. But it's really more of an intuitive sense of moving through space. It's almost as if you're blind and you know how to get from point A to point B just through your imagining of how to move through space. And I think that's the best way to describe it. You know, I've got a dog that's going blind, and it's funny because I can see her mapping out the house and I see her mapping out the backyard. She just spends time every day kind of mapping things out so that she gets it intuitively of where things are. But it's a very, very powerful inner tool that we have that we don't teach kids how to use very often. And in fact, you'll find that if you read books on memory champions, that is the one tool that they use to have an extraordinary memory because they have these kind of spatial maps that they use to trigger memories. And but it's really the fun thing is when you're working with little kids, you're speaking their language. I was just speaking to a friend yesterday that was saying like, how can we teach little kids this stuff? This is like really complex. And I'm like, no, it's speaking their language. Do you remember when you were a kid and you were into imaginary play? You were always imagining what people were saying, your what they were doing, everything was in your head. You could map things out. It's like a natural thing. It's like we almost have become disconnected from these tools in our society when in fact little kids just they absolutely love imaginary play. I don't know a little kid that doesn't like to have a tea party. Well, maybe some boys wouldn't want to, but they have other things that are comparable.
yeah,
And so it really does speak their language.
yeah,
And so teaching these kids how to master their inner voice, how to master visualization. Some kids do it naturally, some kids don't. Just like some are natural artists and some aren't, but we want to teach them how to. I get plenty of kids that have, I used to call it a blind mind's eye until you said a closed mind's eye. And I was like, oh my God, that's really brilliant. Because I've never had a student that couldn't open it. Sometimes it's closed because of trauma, and that's just the way for the brain to accommodate and cope with it. But sometimes it's just, they just didn't know. I mean, I remember a grandmother that brought her grandson in, and I was talking to her grandson about visualization, and she tried it for the first time in her 70s, and she sent me an email and said, I could visualize and I could read, but I never thought of pairing the two. It was
yeah,
absolutely marvelous. Well, we need that
mm,
explicit instruction on
yeah,
how to make academics visual in the mind's eye, to make it, to use the inner voice, to use spatialization, because that's what gets it into our memory. It makes memory working, right? We want our memory to work. And in order to do that, we have to get information into long-term memory and out of long-term memory. And those are our tools.
yes. And I think to join the dots of what you're saying is that you've got working memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. And working memory is this very small, fast memory that holds a tiny amount of information for a short period of time. And if you don't use it, you lose it. It gets deleted. And what you're talking about is if you don't capture that information and put it somewhere in your memory using these kind of strategies, or write it down on a piece of paper, or find a way
Process it,
to
right?
capture it, basically capture it in your memory or capture it in some sort of external system, take a note, draw a picture, do something to capture it so that you don't have to hold that temporary working memory anymore. It can then let go of that and then capture the next bit of information. And this is this rapid process. And often what's fascinating about what happens when the working memory goes wrong is very instructive to people with dyslexia, because if your working memory, and I see this in adults a lot, this isn't just for children, this affects adulthood as well. And I think it's important to state that this working memory affects children in school in one way and affects adults in another way. So, for example, just to give a concrete example, you might have two screens open on your computer and one's on top of the other. And you got a bit of information on one screen, and you know what it's like. You click through to the next screen, and then you have to figure out where you are on the next screen, and then you have to put that information in there, and then you have to think about what you were thinking. And each one of those little steps is using a tiny bit of your working memory. And if you've got like 3 units of working memory rather than five, then and you have to consciously think through, oh, I need this bit of information. Oh, I need to go over there. Oh, I need to do this. Those are all short-term, rapid sort of working memory units that you're using to help you make decisions. Well, you can delete steps just because you don't have enough space in your working memory. So what's the solution to something like that? The solution is to split screen your screen. You have one screen on one side of your screen, one screen on the other, and then you're like, oh, right, that's over there, and that goes over here. That's over there, that goes over here. And it's absolutely incredible. Once you explain to someone what working memory is and why it's important to apply that to your life in those simple ways. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's really important to understand working memory, because it's not some abstract theoretical, like Erica's talking about per se, to help you understand the framework of it. There are so many practical applications of it in just everyday life that can completely. So, that example of split screening it rather than overlap screening it, that can change a repetitive task that might take, you know what it's like when you're filling in a form from a document, okay, and you got the document, you got to paste something and you paste it in and backwards and forwards. That could take 15, 20 minutes if they're on top of each other. But if they're side by side, it could take 5 minutes. And it's not just efficiency of moving it over, it's the efficiency of your working memory. You're no longer going, oh gosh, what was it I was got to do next? Oh,
I
yes. You're
know.
not losing your
Yeah.
place all the time. And that's what your working memory is often doing, is it's trying to help you keep your place, keep the information that's relevant to you, and feeding it to what you need to be focusing in on. And if
Right.
it's important, you go, right, that bit of information is important. It goes there. It goes here. I'm going to put this in my memory palace. That's what they call it, where you walk around a space. They call it this memory
Spatialization.
palace for
Yeah.
spatializing. And oh, I'm going to add it to this story I've got about football and biology or whatever you've made up to help you remember something. And so you connect it to different things you've got and what works for you. So basically, I'm joining the dots here for you, Erica, for the listeners that might not seem obvious to a newbie, is that you've got your working memory. It can very easily delete unless you put it somewhere. And those strategies you've been talking about are how to put it somewhere.
Right. And then also just to clarify this, that we do have an immediate memory and a short-term memory, and they are actually part of the sequence to get to working memory. So your immediate memory is of what you immediately experience. Your short-term memory holds it for a short time, and then it can go into working memory, which is our, again, your memory working. And part of your memory working is making those connections to prior knowledge so that you're dipping into long-term memory. You're also accessing long-term memory so that you can make the connections and organize the information in proper ways. But you could see how, like, you could explicitly teach kids how to encode information in organized ways so that it aids their working memory. I see social media as being so damaging. And the reason why it is, you could see if you think of TikTok and all of these short form videos that last for a short time, and you see something, you're like, oh, that's cool. And you don't even have time to do anything with the information before the next one starts. And then you've watched like an hour and a half of these short videos. And when you're done, you don't remember anything that you saw.
Yeah,
It's because
yeah.
you didn't give your working memory the time to process it long enough or to encode it. And
Yes.
so you kind of walk away saying, wow, there were some cool things in there, but I don't really remember what they were.
Yeah, I have this thing with TikTok where what I do is I've learned this shortcut, which is on TikTok. You can share a TikTok, but I share it into Apple Notes. So the TikTok goes straight into Apple Notes with a quick 3-word heading to help me find it. And often they're really useful. Obviously, lots of entertaining, but there's a lot of useful stuff on TikTok, strategies, tips, things to do. And so that's my way of emptying my working
Capturing
memory,
it.
capturing it, and
Well,
putting it
and it
somewhere
doesn't
useful
even
that I
have,
can then find.
it doesn't even have anything to do with your working memory. You've come up with an external working memory where
Yes,
and it's not even working
absolutely.
memory, it's an external long-term memory.
It's an external long-term memory, absolutely. And I think something that when I do dyslexia talks for Dyslexia Scotland, I keep sharing this analogy of the working memory is like a whiteboard, and you draw something and then you kind of wipe it off, and you have to take a photo of it or put it somewhere, otherwise it gets wiped off by the next thing that's coming along. And it's actually a really great strategy for working memory to have a whiteboard while you're talking with someone. So, for example, what are working memory strategies? Working memory strategies, one of them is a whiteboard. If you're talking with someone, you just go onto the whiteboard while you're talking, write a keyword down, write a little fact, and it dumps your working memory onto that whiteboard and allows you space to think. You're not holding on to the facts because you
Are
can
you
now
being
see it,
realistic or just imaginative whiteboard or a real whiteboard?
a real whiteboard.
So
So
you could, or you can
we
even
have
use
a,
your phone and Apple
yeah,
Notes
yeah.
and stuff like that.
But I highly recommend a real whiteboard. So, like, we have a little rule in our house now where I've put up a whiteboard in the kitchen, and my wife would like to fill it all up with her plans and so on. And my half of the whiteboard, that she has her half of the whiteboard, and I have my half of the whiteboard. My half of the whiteboard has to stay blank all the time, okay? Because I need to use that whiteboard not as a memory, okay, but as a working memory. So
Mm.
the moment my daughter comes up to me and says, "Oh, I've got this new idea for the ferret house. I want to do this, I want to do that," and she's verbally describing it to me, I'm kind of like, "Look, do me a favor, let's just draw on the whiteboard and talk it through." Or if my wife comes to me and says, "We've got these plans, I want to do this on a Saturday, that on a Sunday, we want to do this and that," I'll write it up as a timeline on the whiteboard just to get an
You're mind
idea.
mapping. You are the
Yeah, I'm
mind
mind mapping.
mapping expert.
I'm visualizing it, absolutely. But
Well,
for
you're also create a new word, tactilizing it. You're,
actualizing it, yes.
you are, it's not just visual. You're bringing in another sense. You're bringing another way of
Yes,
processing.
yes,
The fact that you're able to draw it out, it's not
yes,
just the visual, it's the combining those modalities. And when you combine modalities for many individuals, it becomes that much more powerful. It helps you to encode the information into long-term memory because you're looking at it visually and tactily.
yes. And there's something absolutely wonderful about working on a document together where you're visualizing it, you're seeing it. Oh, you mean this? Oh, did you mean that? You don't have to, that this and that kind of, what was that dyslexia you were talking, dysnomia, or the,
Right.
yeah.
So that's rapid
So
automatic naming.
the
Yeah.
rapid automatic naming. So, if you've got that challenge, you can just point, oh, that one. You don't even need to say it. Do you know what
Right.
I mean? And so, the issue here is solving the problem or discussing the decision or whatever, not getting all the words right. You can just point to them. Well, why don't we do this over here and then do that over there? And you can really move into your advantages and work out from your strengths. And so, and this is just one physical example of working with the limitations of your working memory. And the beauty of this is people with dyslexia, if you've got a smaller working memory, you are the canary in the coal mine of nearly every conversation you're having because you're the first one who gets overloaded working memory, but then everyone else's working memory will get overloaded because they've only got 5 or 7 units in their working memory. It's a limited resource. And so we feel it just a bit sooner than everyone else. And so if we have a strategy where we go, oh, right, we should get this on a piece of paper, you get it on a piece of paper, it helps the other person's working memory as well. And it's absolutely amazing to take a moment and just think about how you feel differently inside in a conversation when you start taking a note of it versus when you're just talking. So if you're just talking about something and it's taking a lot out of you and you might be getting stressed, and you're kind of losing the plot. You've got lots juggling in your head. What happens is often you're using so much working memory, so much of your cognitive load, just holding all the pieces there, let alone trying to figure out the answer and become the executive of that. So what happens is if you say, hey, why don't we just write this down somewhere? And you write it down on a mind map, draw a bullet list, do a diagram, whatever it is, you're just getting it out and externalizing it. You can feel inside of yourself the stress just really ease down. And your performance of making a decision go up, which is why there's whiteboards and flip charts in nearly every management office in the world, because this is something people intuitively know and realize when they're making executive decisions and not just following a standard procedure.
And I know that mind mapping is just your magic wand. It works brilliantly for you. And I have to say that I think that it works for far more people than other strategies, largely because it cuts across different modalities. It's visual, it's simultaneous, meaning that it allows you to see the big picture. It's sequential because there's a certain sequence to going through your mind map. Now if you're doing it with someone, it's interactive. If you're talking your way through it, it's verbal. So you could see how it accommodates so many different types of learners. If you're listening to yourself going through it, it's auditory. So it really accommodates a lot of different ways of processing, but just to honor those that don't like them.
Yeah.
Understand that there are different ways of processing. And if that doesn't work for you, some people, they don't need the visual stuff. It's more clutter than they want. They just
Yeah.
want to go through it auditorily. They don't know what they're thinking until they've said it, So
Yes,
a lot of
but
it is
even them, how would they externalize their auditory? They would probably write down a few key
not
words.
necessarily. I mean, I
No?
literally have some students they don't want to write anything out. In fact, I have a student that I'm working with right now, and I've had to reach out to the school and say he really should not take notes. It doesn't work for him.
Okay, so
His
how does
best way
he
of processing is listening and talking.
and how does he take note and remember things?
He just remembers from
He just
hearing.
remembers it.
He remembers from hearing and he remembers from speaking.
So he can
I think
working memory
these
and
are
put it into his memory
outliers.
really quickly.
And this is a kid with a lot of learning issues and
Wow.
attentional issues. So
Wow.
I think, the most important thing to note is yes, I think mind mapping is a wonderful resource. It's a huge net that accommodates the vast majority of learners and the vast majority of dyslexics. But we just have to be careful that we don't insist that is the only way of
Oh
processing.
yeah,
There
yeah, yeah.
are
I would never
those
do
that
that. No,
have
no,
these
no. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. But the point,
completely different
the
ways of processing that
yeah,
when they're enabled to process the way that works for them,
yeah.
it's magic.
But the main thing here, Erica, is having a place to dump your working memory is really useful, isn't
Right.
it?
And for some people, it would be dumping it is just talking.
Right.
But that's, you see, that's why I like mind maps, because they tend to, even if it's not the visual piece of it that's helping you, or the simultaneous piece that's helping you, or the sequential piece, because all of those little parts are going to help you a little bit. Then if for this kid, just if he needs to hear it or verbalize it, then you just focus more on that piece of the mind
Okay.
map.
You're such a technical person. You're so dealing with such a specific issues and so on. I like to simplify and generalize, and I think there's a good balance between the two here. And th this working memory is such an important thing to understand for a teacher, for example. And I suppose this is the point I'm trying to make, Erica, is like a teacher could stand and be talking to a group of students, And it's all verbal, right? And that might help that one boy really well because he got that, he can put that into his memory, no problem, and that's
Well,
it.
for him, it's
But
auditory. For her, it's
yeah,
verbal.
okay. So, all right. But let's say everyone's working memory gets taxed. That's the bottom line. Everyone's working memory gets taxed. And as you get into adulthood, you've got a lot more things to juggle, a lot more things you have to do the executive of. And so that's when you start getting really stressed with, and often a source of stress, a big source of stress is overloading your working memory all the time. And so one of the big wins for nearly everyone, parent with their child at home, is when you're talking to them, go to a whiteboard or write a bit of paper, write down those instructions while you're talking. Go do something and externalize it for them. Teacher at a board, use it, put something up there and externalize it so they can kind of dual code it. They can hear it and they can see it. And they've got something that sort of, they don't have to hold everything in their mind. They can just use their mind to understand, capture, and process what you're saying without losing the important things that you've just said. And I think that's the thing that I would, what's your take on that?
My take is, I'm going to be honest with you, Darius, is that it works so well for you that you're convinced that it's going to work that well for everybody else.
Oh, I like it.
And
Okay.
this, what this comes down to is, it's really, and I'm so glad you stepped into that because this is such an important thing to discuss, is parents, for example, or teachers, they teach the way that they process because they can't imagine how anything else would work. And it's vitally important to not push your way of processing on others. That's why I like mind mapping, because it hits so many
But I'm
different
not
ways of
talking about mind
processing.
mapping. I'm
But
not talking about
I know you were talking
mind
about
mapping.
drawing things out
I'm writing,
and writing.
writing,
It's
drawing,
great. It
just
doesn't, it's not great for
diagram,
some
taking a
people.
note.
For some people, it's just not. It's a
So you think,
distraction. It's annoying. What if they have dysgraphia? Then it doesn't.
but
But all I
but
can
they're
tell you,
not, but they're not writing it. You're writing it. They're not copying what you're writing.
okay, so then you're making it visual for them. What if they're not visual? Or maybe they do need to write it. The bottom line is this: if you really want to help individuals, assess what their best ways of processing are and then accommodate them in your teaching.
Yes, that's
That's
that's the ideal, Erica. But the point here is not like you're in the workplace, okay? You're in your work. I work in with adults more mostly. You're at university, you're in the workplace. You don't always have the opportunity to assess what one person's style is or processing
oh, sure
thing
you
is.
do.
So what do you do to help them with their working memory?
I would assess. I mean, they can take the yippee. They can take the yippee. I have a processing profile.
Yeah,
You
but
take
but
that.
but
And
talking
then,
about ordinary people, you meet someone, you're teaching a group of people, you're in a workplace, you're on a Zoom call or whatever. You're dealing with people's working memory. Do you just keep it all verbal?
well, what you want, if you don't want to take an assessment to figure out exactly what everybody's best ways of processing are, your best bet is to use a variety of modalities. So
Yes.
you want to go as multi-processing as you can. You want to make it visual, you want to make it auditory, you want to encourage a tactile piece, but making it optional. Having breakout sessions so that people can verbally process things and suggesting that people can do different things, like you could do a mind map or you could do an outline, you know and and integrating all the different ways of processing. And so when I do presentations, I consciously go through the presentation and say, did I honor all 12 ways of processing? Did I honor the verbal learners? Did I stop and give them the opportunity to process out loud? Did I honor the kinesthetic learners? Did I give breaks where they could move around, or did I do activities that allowed them to move around? So if you want to just learn, if you want to accommodate all ways of processing, that's your best way to accommodate all individuals, and just learning what the 12 ways of processing are.
Okay.
But I can tell you, when I assess my students, whether young students, college students, or adults, it's the first thing I do, because then I know as a practitioner exactly how to present things. And then it's like magic. They're like, wow, that works unbelievably for me. I have a couple college students that I've been working with, and the first thing I did was give them their profile. And as soon as I focused all of my remediation on pushing them towards tools that enable them to use their best ways of processing, their grades just, went from D's and F's to A's and B's really quickly and really easily. And because sometimes the teachers aren't going to process things the way you process, or an employer is not going to process in a way that works for you. But it doesn't mean that you can't take that information home and reprocess it. And that's the beauty of AI. AI allows us, like Notebook LM, say you can't really make sense of anything unless it's sequential. You can take that information, put it into Notebook LM, and do a timeline. Say you're simultaneous. You can take it into Notebook LM, or you can take it to ivvi, and you can ask it to create a mind map. And then all of a sudden it's speaking your language, and you're like, oh, that's so easy now. Now I totally
Yeah.
get it. So, but teaching people, and that's executive functioning, so to pull this all back, is teaching them how to be that functioning executive. All right, I totally don't know what my boss wants. I totally don't get what my teacher wants. And I know that if I'm going to go to them, they're just going to say the same thing, and I'm still not going to get it. But AI will get it, and maybe it can help me reprocess it in a way that I do understand what they want. And the nice thing about it is AI can help you to even break it down so that you don't miss anything. Because again, sometimes we process in a way that where we lose some of the content, we lose some of the information, or we lose a certain perspective. And we can always say, okay, so we've reprocessed it this way. Are we missing anything in the translation from one processing modality to the next? Is there a missing link here? But teaching individuals how to use AI to process and reprocess things in ways that are beneficial to you can be a total game changer.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. In many ways, we've kind of gone off the topic of working memory into the realm of processing. And it'd be
But working
interesting to
memory
just,
is
yeah,
processing.
that's what I was going to ask, like, be interesting to connect the two, working memory and processing, make that more explicit. How do you see the connection between the
Absolutely.
two?
So you can think of it as, immediate and short-term memory is information coming in. And what are they coming in from? Your senses, right? So senses have something to do with processing. Visual is a sense, auditory is a sense, tactile is a sense, kinesthetic is a spatial sense. And then there are other ways of processing that come from information processing, and that's sequential and simultaneous, which is the organization of that information is another way of processing. And then excuse me, there's verbal, which is, it's not auditory. I guess you could say that you're making it auditory by saying it out loud so that you can hear yourself, right? But it's a little different than just listening. It's kind of a physical auditory, where it's coming out of your own mouth, out of your own ideas. And then there's the interactive piece. That's not really a sense, but there are those people that just having the company of others really helps them to make sense of information. And then there's the rhythmic melodic, which those are people that just, I think what it does is it aids the working memory, whether it's a rhyme or a beat or even
Okay.
it's blocking unexpected noise. It's again a way of processing. So these are all ways of processing. Some of them are sensory processing, some of them are information processing, and some gets into Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences. That these are just all ways to process the information so that information in our memory, our working memory, can make it into long-term memory in a
Okay.
way that we can access it.
Okay, so if we're thinking about it in the sequence, you got your working memory, you need to process it to get it into your long-term memory. And so that's this connection. So with dyslexia, often you've got difficulties with certain types of processing, but you can also have challenges with working memory, like a smaller working memory. And so
Yeah.
they can compound one another. So if you understand a bit about executive function, especially working memory, it can really help you understand dyslexia and your processing, the way you process information.
I agree. And can I make a suggestion? Can we continue this conversation? Because I
Okay.
would love to talk about dyslexia and inhibitory control.
Yeah, it's a biggie. And it's
And
also a
maybe,
really useful overlap with ADHD too, because executive
absolutely.
function is often associated with ADHD,
Mhm.
because a lot of people with ADHD talk about executive function. It's a very common thing and a common strategy to assist with ADHD because inhibitory control, attention control, is a big part of ADHD and it's a big part of executive function. So why don't we do that in the next session and also do an overlap with ADHD and dyslexia?
And then we'll see if we don't get to cognitive flexibility, we could do that in another one. Executive functioning is big. But I also know that if we present too much in a single podcast, it's going to be too much for our working memories. So we'll do that in the next one. Well, thank you so much, and I look forward to the next one.
Before we go, a quick reminder about our sponsor, ivvi Notes. If you've ever walked out of a lecture or meeting thinking, what just happened? ivvi was built for you. It records what was said, transcribes it live, and creates a real-time mind map. So you can see the structure of the conversation as it unfolds. You're not left with a wall of text or random bullet points. You get instant visual notes that actually make sense when you come back to them. Whether you're studying, working, or just trying to stay on top of things at work, ivvi helps you remember what matters. It's especially designed for people who think differently, those with dyslexia, or anyone who finds traditional note-taking overwhelming. And here's the great news. ivvi is fully approved for the UK's Disabled Students Allowance. So if you're at university and are eligible for DSA or access to work, you could get access to the full version, fully funded for years. You can try it for free right now by going to ivvi.app. That's ivvi.app. Thanks again for tuning in. I'm Darius Namdaran, and I'll see you in the next episode.